48 Laws of Power, Chapter 26. Keep your hands clean. You must see a paragon of stability and efficiency. Your hands are never soiled by mistakes and nasty deeds. Maintain such a spotless appearance by using others as scapegoats and cat paws to disguise your involvement. Conceal your mistakes. Have a scapegoat around to take the blame. Our good name and reputation depend more on what we conceal than what we reveal. Everyone makes mistakes, but those who are truly clever manage to hide them and to make sure someone else is blamed. A convenient scapegoat should always be kept around for such moments. Near the end of 2nd century AD, as China's mighty Han Empire slowly collapsed, the great general and emperor Minister Tao emerged as the most powerful man in the country. Seeking to extend his power base and to rid himself of the last of his rivals, Tao began a campaign to take control of the strategically vital Central Plain. During the siege of a key city, he slightly miscalculated the timing for supplies of grain to arrive from the capital. As he waited for the shipment to come in, the army ran low on food, and Tao was forced to order the chef of Comrat to reduce his rations. Tao kept a tight rein on the army and ran a network of informers. His spies soon reported to him the men were grumbling that he was living well while they themselves had barely enough to eat. Perhaps Tao was keeping the food for himself, they murmured. If the grumbling spread, Tao could have immunity on his hands. He summoned the chef of the consulate to his tent. I want to ask you to lend me something, and you must not refuse, Tao told the chef. What is it? The chef replied. I want the loan of your head to show the troops, said Tao. But I've done nothing wrong, cried the chef. I know, Tao, with a sigh, but if I do not put you to death, there will be a mutiny. Do not grieve after you're gone. I'll look after your family. Put this way, the request left the chef no choice, so he resigned himself to his fate and was beheaded the very next day. Seeing his head on public display, the soldiers stopped grumbling. Some saw through Tao's gesture, but kept quiet, stunned and intimidated by his violence. And most accepted his version of who was to blame, preferring to believe in his wisdom and fairness than in his incompetence and cruelty. Tao came to power in an extremely tumultuous time. In the struggle for supremacy in the crumbling Han Empire, enemies had emerged from all sides. The battle for the Central Plain had proven more difficult than he imagined, and money and provisions were a constant concern. No wonder that under such stress, he had forgotten to order supplies in time. Once it became clear that the day was a critical mistake and that the army was seething with mutiny, Tao had two options: apologize and excuses or scapegoat. Understanding the workings of power and the importance of appearances as he did, Tao did not hesitate for a moment. He shopped around for the most convenient head and had it served up immediately. Occasional mistakes are inevitable. The world is just too unpredictable. People of power, however, are undone not by mistakes they make, but by the way they deal with them. Like surgeons, they must cut away the tumor with speed and finality. Excuses and apologies are much too blunt tools for this delicate operation. The powerful avoid them. By apologizing, you open up all sorts of doubt about your competence, your intentions, any other mistakes you may not have confessed. Excuses satisfy no one, and apologies make everyone uncomfortable. The mistake does not vanish with an apology. It deepens and festers. Better to cut it off instantly, distract attention from yourself, and focus attention on a convenient scapegoat before people have time to ponder your responsibility or your possible incompetence. I would rather betray the world than let the world betray me. For several years, Caesar Borgia campaigned to gain control of large parts of Italy in the name of his father, Pope Alexander. In the year 1500, he managed to take Romagna, northern Italy. The reign had for years been ruled by a series of greedy masters who had plundered its wealth for themselves. Without police or any disciplined force, it had descended into lawlessness, whole areas being ruled by robbers and feuding families. To establish order, Caesar appointed a lieutenant general of the reign, Ramiro de Orca, a cruel, vigorous man, according to Machiavelli. Caesar gave the Arco absolute powers. With energy and violence, the Orco established a severe, brutal justice in Romagna and soon rid it of almost all its lawless elements. But in his zeal, he sometimes went too far, and after a couple of years, the local population resented and even hated him. In December of 1502, Caesar took decisive action. He first let it be known that he had not approved of the Orca's cruel and violent deeds, which stemmed from the lieutenant's brutal nature. Then, in December of the 22nd, he imprisoned the Orca in the town of Cesena, and the day after Christmas, the townspeople awoke to find a strange spectacle in the middle of the plaza. The Orca's headless body, dressed in a lavish suit with a purple cape, the head impaled beside it on a pike, the bloody knife and an executioner's block laid out beside the head. As Machiavelli concluded his comments on the affair, the ferocity of this scene left the people at once stunned and satisfied. Caesar Borgia was a master player in the game of power, always planning several moves ahead. He set his opponents the cleverest traps. For this, Machiavelli honored him above all others in the prince. Caesar foresaw the future with amazing clarity in Romagna. Only brutal justice would bring order to the reign. The process would take several years, and at first the people would welcome it, but it would soon make many enemies, and the citizens would come to resent the imposition of such unforgiving justice, especially by outsiders. Caesar himself then could not be seen as the agent of this justice. The people's hatred would cause too many problems in the future. And so he chose the man who could do the dirty work, knowing in advance that once the task was done, he would have to display the Orca's head on a pike. The scapegoat in this case had been planned from the beginning. With Teo, the scapegoat was an entirely innocent man in the Romagna. He was the offensive weapon in Caesar's arsenal and let him get the dirty work done without bloodying his own hands. With this second kind of scapegoat, it is wise to separate yourself from the hatchet man at some point, either leaving him dangling in the wind or, like Caesar, even making yourself the one to bring him to justice. Not only are you free of involvement in the problem, you appear as the one who cleaned it up. The Athenians regularly maintained a number of degraded and useless beings at the public's expense. And when any calamity such as plague, drought, famine befell the city, the scapegoats were led about and then sacrificed, apparently by being stoned outside the city. The use of a scapegoat is an old civilization itself. An example of it can be found in cultures around the world. The main idea behind these sacrifices is shifting the of guilt and sin to an outside figure, object, animal, or man, which is then banished or destroyed. The Hebrews used to take a live goat, hence the term scapegoat, upon whose head the priest would lay both hands while confessing the sins of the children of Israel. Having thus had those sins transferred to it, the beast would be led away and abandoned in the wilderness. With the Athenians and the Aztecs, the scapegoat was human, often a person fed and raised for the purpose. Since famine and plague were taught to be visited only on humans by the gods, in punishment for wrongdoing, the people suffered not only from the famine and the plague themselves, but from blame and guilt. They freed themselves of guilt by transferring it to an innocent person whose death was intended to satisfy the divine powers and banish the evils from their midst. It is an extremely human response to not look inward after a mistake or crime, but rather to look outward to fix blame and guilt on a convenient object. When the plague was ravaging, Thebes Odious looked everywhere for its cause, everywhere except besides himself and his own sin or of incest, which had so offended the gods and occasionally the plague. This profound need to exteriorize one's guilt, to project it on another person or object, has immense power, which the clever know how to harness. Sacrifice is a ritual, perhaps the most ancient ritual of all. Ritual, too, is a wellspring of power. In the killing of the Orca, note Caesar's symbolic and ritualistic display of his body. By framing it in this dramatic way, he focused guilt outward. The citizens of Romagna responded instantly because it comes so naturally to us to look outward rather than inward. We readily accept the scapegoat's guilt. The bloody sacrifice of the scapegoat seems a barbaric relic of the past, but the practice lives on this day. If indirectly and symbolically, since power depends on appearances, and those in power must seem never to make mistakes, the use of scapegoats is as popular as ever. What modern leader will take responsibility for his blunders? He searches out others to blame, a scapegoat to sacrifice. When Mao Zedong's cultural revolution failed miserably, he made no apologies or excuses to the Chinese people. Instead, like Tao before him, he offered up scapegoats, including his own personal security and high-ranking member of the party, Chen Pata. Franklin D. Roosevelt had a reputation for honesty and fairness. Throughout his career, however, he faced many situations in which being the nice guy would have spelled political disaster. Yet he could not be seen as the agent of any foul play. For 20 years, then, his secretary, Louis Hall, played the role of the Orca had. He handled the backroom deals, the manipulation of the press, the underhanded campaign maneuvers, and whenever a mistake was committed or a dirty trick contradicting Roosevelt's carefully crafted image became public, Howe served as a scapegoat and never complained. Besides conveniently shifting blame, a scapegoat can serve as a warning to others. In 1631, a plot was hatched out France's Cardinal Richelieu from power. A plot became known as the Day of Dupes. It's almost succeeded since it has involved the upper echelon of government, including the Queen Mother. But through luck and his own connivances, Rich survived. One of the key conspirators was a man named Marsalak, the keeper of the seals. Rich could not imprison himself without implicating the queen's mother, an extremely dangerous tactic. So he targeted Mark's brother, a marshal in the army. This man had no involvement in the plot. Rich, however, afraid that other conspirators might be in the air, especially in the army, decided to set an example. He tried the brother on trumped-up charges and had him executed. In this way, he indirectly punished the real perpetrator who had thought himself protected and warned any future conspirators that he would not shrink from sacrificing the innocent to protect his own power. In fact, it is often wise to choose the most innocent victim as a sacrificial goat. Such people will not be powerful enough to fight you, and their naive protests may be seen as protesting too much, may be seen, in other words, as a sign of their guilt. Be careful, however, not to create a martyr. It is important that you remain the victim. The poor leader betrayed by the incompetence of those around you. If the scapegoat appears too weak and his punishment too cruel, you may end up the victim of your own device. Sometimes you should find a more powerful scapegoat, one who will elicit less sympathy in the long run. In this vein, history has time and again shown the value of using a close associate as a scapegoat. This is known as the fall of the favorite. Most kings had a personal favorite at court, a man whom they singled out, sometimes for no apparent reason, and lavished with favors and attention. But this court favor could serve as a convenient scapegoat in case of a threat to the king's reputation. The public would readily believe in the scapegoat's guilt. Why would the king sacrifice his favorite unless he were guilty? And the other quarters, resentful of the favor anyway, would rejoice at his downfall. The king, meanwhile, would rid himself of a man who by the time had probably learned too much about him, perhaps becoming arrogant and even disdain of him. Choosing a close associate as a scapegoat has the same value as the fall of the favorite. You may lose a friend or aid, but in the long-term scheme of things, it is important to hide your mistakes than to hold on to someone who one day will probably turn against you. Besides, you can always find a new favorite and take his place. The innocent goat, on the Day of the Atonement, the highest priest brings the goat into the temple, places his head on its head, and confesses the people's sin, transferring guilt to the guiltless beast, which is then led to the wilderness and abandoned, and the people's sins are blamed, vanishing with him. Folly consists not in committing folly, but in being incapable of concealing it. All men make mistakes, but the wise conceal the blunders they make, while fools make them public. Reputation depends more on what is hidden than is what is seen. If you cannot be good, be careful. In the fable, the monkey grabbed the paw of his friend, the cat, and used it to fish chestnuts out of the fire, thus getting the nuts he craves without hurting himself. If there is something unpleasant and unpopular that needs to be done, it is too risky for you to do the work yourself. You need a cat's paw. Someone who does the dirty, dangerous work for you. The cat's paw grabs what you need, hurts whom you need hurt, and keeps people from noticing that you are the one responsible. Let someone else be the executioner or the bearer of bad news, while you bring only joy and glad tidings. In 59 BC, the future Queen Cleopatra of Egypt, then 10 years old, witnessed the outthrow and the banishment of her father, Ptolemy XII, at the hands of his elder daughters, her own sisters. One of the daughters, Bernice, emerged as a leader of the rebellion, and to ensure that she would not rule Egypt alone, she imprisoned her other sisters and murdered her own husband. This may have been necessary as a practical step to secure her rule, but that a member of the royal family, a queen no less, would so overtly exact such violence on her own family horrified her subjects and stirred up powerful opposition. 4 years later, this opposition was able to return to power, and he promptly had Bernice and the other sisters beheaded. In 51 BC, Ptolemy died, leaving 4 remaining children as heirs. As was the tradition in Egypt, the eldest son, Ptolemy XIII, only 10 at the time, married the elder sister Cleopatra, now 18, and the couple took the throne together as king and queen. None of the 4 children felt satisfied with this. Everyone, including Cleopatra, wanted more power. A struggle emerged between Cleopatra and Ptolemy, each trying to push the other to the side. In 48 BC, with the help of the government faction that feared Cleopatra's ambition, Ptolemy was able to force his sister to flee the country, leaving himself as sole ruler. In exile, Cleopatra schemed. She wanted to rule alone and to restore Egypt to its past glory, a goal she felt none of her other siblings could achieve. Yet as long as they were alive, she could not realize her dream. And the example of Bernice had made it clear that no one would serve a queen who was seen murdering her own kind. Even Ptolemy XIII had not dared murder Cleopatra, although he knew she would plot against him from abroad. Within a year after Cleopatra's banishment, the Roman dictator Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt, determined to make the country a Roman colony. Cleopatra saw her chance. Re-entering Egypt in disguise, she traveled hundreds of miles to reach Caesar in Alexander. Legend has it that she had herself smuggled into his presence and rolled up inside a carpet, which was gracefully unfurled at his feet. Revealing the young queen, Cleopatra immediately went to work on the Roman. She appealed to his love of spectacle and his interest in Egypt history, and she poured on her feminine charms. Caesar soon succumbed and restored Cleopatra to the throne. Cleopatra's siblings seethed. She had outmaneuvered them. P the 13th would not wait to see what happened next. From his place in Alexander, he summoned a great army to march on the city and attack Caesar. In response, Caesar immediately put P and the rest of the family under house arrest. But Cleopatra's younger sister, Arsinoe, escaped from the palace and placed herself at the head of the approaching Egyptian troops, proclaiming herself Queen of Egypt. Now Cleopatra finally saw her chance. She convinced Caesar to release P from house arrest under the agreement that he would broker a truce. Of course, she knew he would do the opposite, that he would fight Arsinoe for control of the Egyptian army. But this was Cleopatra's benefit. For it would divide the royal family. Better still, it would give Caesar the chance to defeat and kill her siblings in battle. Reinforced by troops from Rome, Caesar swiftly defeated the rebels in the Egyptian retreat. P drowned in the Nile. Caesar captured Arsinoe and had her sent to Rome as a prisoner. He also executed the numerous enemies who had conspired against Cleopatra and imprisoned others who had opposed her. To reinforce for her position as uncontested queen, Cleopatra now married the only sibling left, P the 14th, only 11 at the time and the weakest of the lot. 4 years later, P mysteriously died of poison. In 1441, Cleopatra employed on a second Roman leader, Mark Antony. The same tactic had she used so well on Julius Caesar. After seducing him, she hinted to him that her sister Arsinoe, still a prisoner in Rome, had conspired to destroy him. Mark Antony believed her and promptly had Arsinoe executed, thereby getting rid of the last of the siblings who had posed such a threat to Cleopatra. Legend has it that Cleopatra succeeded through her seduction charms, but in reality, her power came from an ability to get people to do her bidding without realizing they were being manipulated. Caesar and Antony not only rid her of most dangerous siblings, P the 13th and Arsinoe, they disseminated all of her enemies in both the government and the military. The two men became her catpaws. They entered the fire for her, did the ugly but necessary work while shielding her from appearing as the destroyer of her siblings and fellow Egyptians. And in the end, both men acquiesced to her desire to rule Egypt, not as a Roman colony, but as independent allied kingdom. And they did all this for her without realizing how she had manipulated them. This was persuasion of the subtlest and most powerful kind. A queen must never dirty her hands with ugly tasks, nor can a king appear in public with blood on his face. Yet power cannot survive without the constant squashing of enemies. There will always be dirty little tasks that have to be done to keep you on the throne. Like Cleopatra, you must need a cat's paw. This will usually be a person from outside your immediate circle who will therefore be unlikely to realize how he or she is being used. You will find these dupes everywhere. People who enjoy doing you favors, especially if you throw them a minimum bone or two in exchange. But as they accomplish tasks, they may seem to them innocent enough, or at least completely justified. They're actually clearing the field for you, spreading the information you feed them, undermining people they do not realize are your rivals, inadvertently furthering your cause, dirtying their hands while yours remain spotless. In the late 1920s, civil war broke out in China as the nationalists and communist parties battled for control of the country. In 1927, Chiang, the nationalist leader, vowed to kill every last communist and over the next few years, he nearly accomplished his task, pushing his enemies hard until in 1934 to 1935, he forced them into the Long March, a 6,000-mile retreat from the southeast to the remote northwest through harsh terrain in which most of their ranks were decimated. In late 1936, Chiang planned one last offensive to wipe them out, but he was caught in a mutiny. His own soldiers captured him and turned him over to the communists. Now he could only expect the worst. Meanwhile, however, the Japanese began an invasion of China, and much to Chiang's surprise, instead of killing him, the communist leader, Tang, proposed to do a deal. The communists would let him go, and he would would recognize him as a commander of their forces, as well as his, if he would agree to fight alongside them against their common enemy. Chiang had expected torture and execution. Now he could not believe his luck. How soft these Reds had become. Without having to fight a rear guard action against the communists, he knew he would beat the Japanese, and then a few years down the line, he would turn around and destroy the Reds with ease. He had nothing to lose and everything to gain by agreeing to these terms. The communists proceeded to fight the Japanese in their usual fashion with a hit-and-run guerrilla tactics, while the nationalists fought a more convenient war. Together, after several years, they succeeded in evicting the Japanese. Now, however, Chiang finally understood that Mao had really planned. His own army had met the burnt of Japanese artillery, was greatly weakened, and would take a few years to recover. The communists, meanwhile, had not only avoided any direct hits from the Japanese, they had used the time to recoup their strength and to spread out and gain pockets of influence all over China. As soon as the war against the Japanese ended, the Civil War started again. But this time, the communists enveloped the weakened nationalists and slowly beat them into submission. The Japanese had served as Mao's cat paws, inadvertently plowing the fields for the communists and making possible their victory over Chiang. Most leaders who had taken as powerful an enemy of Chiang prisoner would have made sure to kill him, but in doing so, they would have lost the chance Mao exploited. Without the experienced Chiang as leader of the nationalists, the fight to drive the Japanese out might have lasted much longer, with devastating results. Mao was too far clever to let anger spoil the chance to kill two birds with one stone. In essence, Mao used the two cat paws to help him attain total victory. First, he carefully baited Chiang into taking charge of the war against the Japanese. Mao knew the nationalists led by Chiang would do most of the hard fighting and would succeed in pushing the Japanese out of China if they did not have to concern themselves with fighting the communists at the same time. The nationalists then were the first cat paws used to evict the Japanese. But Mao also knew that in the process of leading the war against the invaders, the Japanese artillery and air support would decimate, and the conventional forces of the nationalists doing damage it could take the communists decades to inflict. Why waste time and lives if the Japanese could do the job quickly? It was this wise policy of using one's cat's paw after another's that allowed the communists to prevail. There are two uses of the cat's paw: to save appearances, as Cleopatra did, and to save energy and effort. The latter case in particular demands that you plan several moves in advance, realizing that a temporary move backwards, letting Chiang go, can lead to a giant leap forward. If you are temporarily weakened and need time to recover, it will often serve you well to use those around you, both as a screen to hide your intention and as a cat paw to do your work for you. Look for a powerful third party who shares an enemy with you. If for different reasons, then take advantage of their superior power to deal blows, which would have cost you much more energy since you are weaker. You can even gently guide them into hostilities. Always search out the overly aggressive as potential cat paws. They are often more than willing to get into a fight and you can choose just the right fight for your purposes. Kariyama Daisen was an adept. Hot water for tea, the Japanese tea ceremony. As a student of teachings of the great tea master, Son Nuriku, around 1620, Daisen learned that a friend of his, Hachino Saman, had borrowed a large sum of money, 300 ryo, to help a relative who had fallen into debt. But although So had managed to bail out his relative, he had simply displaced the burden onto himself. Days knew So would well. He neither cared nor understood much about money and could easily get into trouble through slowness in repaying the loan, which had been made by a wealthy merchant called Kawaya Saneman. Yet, if Days offered to help So pay back the loan, he would refuse out of pride and might even be offended. One day, Days visited his friend, and after touring the garden and looking at So's prized peonies, they retired to his reception room. Here Days saw a painting by the master Kano Tuniyu. "Hey, Days," exclaimed, "a splendid piece of painting. I do not know when I have seen anything I like better." After several more bouts of praise, Solomon had no choice. "Well," he said, "since you like it so much, I hope you will do more the favor of accepting it." At first, Days refused, but when Solomon insisted, he gave in. The next day, So, in turn, received a package from Days. Inside it was a beautiful and delicate vase, which Days, an accompanying note asking his friend to accept as a token of his appreciation for the painting that So had so gracefully given him the day before. He explained that the vase had been made by Shunnoruki himself and bore an inscription from Imperial Hideyoshi. If So did not care for the vase, Days suggested he might make a gift of it to an inherent Chenyu, perhaps the merchant's Sanmon, who had often expressed a desire to possess it. I hear, Days continued, he had a fine piece of fancy paper, the 300 ryo, the IOU, which you would much like. It is possible you might arrange an exchange. Realizing what his gracious friend was up to, So took the vase to the wealthy leader. "However, did you get this?" exclaimed Saneman. When Solomon showed him the vase, "I have often heard of it, but this is the first time I have ever seen it. It is such a treasure that it is never allowed outside the gate." He instantly offered to exchange the debt note for the flower vase and to give So 300 more on top of it. But So, who did not care for money, only wanted the debt note back, and Sane gladly gave it to him. Then So immediately hurried to Daisen's house to thank him for his clever support. Kiriyama Daisen understood that the granting of a favor is never simple. If it is done with fuse or obviousness, it is its receiver burdened by obligation. This may give a doer a certain power, but is a power that will eventually self-destruct, for it will store resentment and resistance. A favor done indirectly and elegantly has 10 times more power. Daisen knew a direct approach would only have offended So. By letting his friend give him the painting, however, he made So feel that he too had pleased his friend with the gift. In the end, all three parties emerged from the encounter feeling fully in their own way. In essence, Days made himself the cat's paw, the tool to take the chestnut out of the fire. He must have felt some pain in losing the vase, but he gained not only the painting, but more important, the power of the court. The court uses his gloved hand to soften any blows against him, disguises his scars, and makes the act of rescue more eloquent and clean by helping others. The court eventually helps himself. Day's example proves the paradigm for every favor done between friends and peers, indirectly intricating your friends from distress without imposing yourself or making them feel obligated to you. One should not be too straightforward. Go and see the forest. The straight trees are cut down, the crooked ones are left standing. As a leader, you may imagine that constant diligence and the appearance of working harder than anyone else signify power. Actually, though, they have the opposite effect. They imply weakness. Why are you working so hard? Perhaps you are incompetent and have to put in extra effort just to keep us. Perhaps you are the one of those who does not know how to delegate and has to meddle in everything. The truly powerful, on the other hand, seem never to be in a hurry or overburdened. While others work their fingers to the bone, they take their leisure. They know how to find the right people to put in an effort while they save their energy and keep their hands out of the fire. Similarly, you may believe that by taking on the dirty work yourself, involving yourself indirectly in unpleasant actions, you impose your power and instill fear. In fact, you make yourself look ugly and abusive of your high position. Truly powerful people keep their hands clean. Only good things around them and only announcements they make are glorious and achievements. You will often find it necessary, of course, to expend energy or to effect an evil but unnecessary action. But you must never appear to be this action agent. Find the cat's paw. Develop the art of finding, using, and in time getting rid of these people when their cat's paw has been fulfilled. On the eve of an important river battle, the great 3rd century Chinese strategist Zhuge Liang found himself falsely accused of secretly working for the other side. As proof of his loyalty, his commander ordered him to produce 100,000 arrows for the army within 3 days and to be put to death. Instead of trying to manufacture the arrows, an impossible task, Lang took dozens of boats and had bundles of straws lashed to their sides. In the late afternoon, when mist always blanketed the river, he floated the boats towards the enemy camp. Fearing a trap from the wily Zhuge Liang, the enemy did not attack the barely visible boats with boats of their own, but showered them with arrows from the banks. As Lang's boats inched closer, they redoubled the rain of arrows which stuck in the thick straw. After several hours, the men hiding on board sailed, and the vessel quickly downstream, with Zhuge Liang met them and collected his 100,000 arrows. Zhuge Liang would never do work that others could do for him. He was always thinking of tricks like this one. The key to planning such a strategy is the ability to think far ahead. to imagine ways in which other people can be baited into doing the job for you. An essential element in the making this strategy work is to disguise your goal, shrouding in mystery, like the strange enemy boats appearing dimly in the mist. When your rivals cannot be sure what you are after, they will react in ways that often work against them in the long run. In fact, they will become your cat's paw. If you disguise your intentions, it is much easier to guide them into moves than accomplish exactly what you want done but prefer not to do yourself. This may require planning several moves in advance, like a billiard ball that bounces off the sides a few times before heading into the right pocket. The early 20th century American con artist Yellow Kid Whale knew no matter how skillfully he homed in on the perfect wealthy sucker, if he, a stranger, approached this man directly, the sucker might become suspicious. So Whale would find someone the sucker already knew to serve as a cat's paw, someone lower on the totem pole who was himself an unlikely target and would therefore be less suspicious. Whale would interest this man in a scheme promising incredible wealth. Convinced the scheme was for real, the cat's paw would often suggest, without prompting, that his boss or wealthy friend should get involved. Having more cash to invest, this man would increase the size of the pot, making bigger bucks for all concerned. The cat's paw would then involve the wealthy sucker, who had been Whale's target all along, but who would not suspect a trap, since it often the best way to approach a person of power. Use an associate or subordinate to hook you up with your primary target. The cat's paw establishes your credibility and shields you from the unsavory appearance of being too pushy in your courtship. The easiest and most efficient way to use a cat's paw is often to plant information with him that he will then spread to your primary target. False or planted information is a powerful tool, especially if spread by a dupe who no one suspects. You will find it very easy to play innocent and disguise yourself as the source. The strategic therapist, Dr. Milton H. Erickson, would often encounter among his patients a couple in which the wife wanted the therapy, but the husband absolutely refused. Rather than wasting energy trying to deal with the man directly, Dr. Erickson would see the wife alone, and as she talked, he would interject interpretations of the husband's behavior that he knew would rile the husband up if he heard them. Sure enough, the wife would tell her husband what the doctor had said. After a few weeks, the husband would be so furious, would insist on joining his wife in the sessions so he could set the doctor straight. Finally, you may well find cases in which deliberately offering yourself as the cat's paw would ultimately gain your great power. This is a ruse of the perfect quarter. It is a symbol of Sir Walter Raleigh, who once played his cloak on a muddy ground so that Queen Elizabeth would not sully her shoes. As an instrument that protects a master or a peer from unpleasantness or danger, you gain immense respect, which sooner or later will pay dividends. And remember, if you can make your assistant subtle and gracious rather than boastful and burdensome, your recompense will be that much the more satisfying and powerful. The cat's paw, it has long paws to grab things. It is soft and padded. Take hold of the cat's paw and use its paw to pluck things out of the fire. To claw your enemy, to play with the mouse before devouring it. Sometimes you hurt the cat, but most often it doesn't feel a thing. Do everything pleasant yourself, everything unpleasant through a third party. By adopting the first course, you win favor. By taking the second, you deflect ill will. Important affairs often require rewards and punishment. Let only the good come from you and the evil from others. The cat's paw and the scapegoat must be used with extreme caution and delicacy. They are like screens that hide your own involvement in dirty work from the public. If at any moment the screen is lifted and you are seen as the manipulator, the puppet master, the whole dynamic turns around. Your hand will be seen everywhere, and you will be blamed for misfortunes you may have nothing to do with. Once the truth is revealed, events will be snowballed beyond your control. In 1952, Queen Catherine of France conspired to do away with G and an admiral in the French Navy and lending numbers of French protest community. Calumny was close to Catherine's son, Charles IX, and she feared his growing influence on the young king. So she arranged for a member of the Guise family, one of the most powerful royal clans in France, to assassinate him. Secretly, however, Catherine had another plan. She wanted the H family to blame the G's for killing one of their leaders and to take revenge. With one blow, she would erase or injure two threatening rivals and the G's family. Yet both plans went awry. The assassins missed his target, only wounding Carl. Knowing Catherine as his enemy, he strongly suspected it was she who had set up the attack on him, and he told the king so. Eventually, the failed assassination and the arguments that ensued from it set off a chain of events that led to a bloody civil war between Catholic and Protestants, culminating in the horrifying massacre of St. Bartholomew Eve, in which thousands of Protestants were killed. If you use a cat's paw or a scapegoat in action of great consequence, be very careful. Too much can go wrong. It is often wiser to use such dupes in more innocent endeavors, where mistakes or miscalculations will cause no serious harm. Finally, there are moments when it is advantageous not to disguise your involvement or responsibility, but rather take the blame yourself for some mistakes. If you have power and are secure in it, you should sometimes play the penitent. With a sorrowful look, you ask for forgiveness from those weaker than you. It is the ploy of the king who makes a show of his own sacrifices for the good of the people. Similarly, upon occasion, you may want to appear as an agent of punishment in order to instill fear and trembling in your subordinates. Instead of the cat's paw, you show your own mighty hand as a threatening gesture. Play such a card sparingly. If you play it too often, fear will turn into resentment and hatred. Before you know it, such emotions will spark in vigorous opposition that will someday bring you down. Get in the habit of using a cat's paw. It is far safer.